I was never the kind of woman who made a scene. My late husband Thomas used to say I could survive a tornado with a cup of tea and a polite smile. He wasn't wrong. But nothing in 60-plus years of living prepared me for the day my own daughter looked me dead in the eye and told me I was too old to stay in my own house. It happened on a Tuesday. Tuesdays are the worst for bad news. People always pick them because it's too late to ruin Monday and too early to feel guilty about Friday. Rebecca came in wearing one of her boss outfits, blazer, high heels, phone glued to her hand. She had that look, half business meeting, half judgment. "Mom," she said, setting her purse down like she was about to negotiate a merger. "We need to talk about the property." I was at the kitchen table balancing the checkbook, same way I'd done for 40 years. "What about it?" I asked. She sighed the way only adult children sigh when they think their parents are ancient furniture. "You've done enough. It's time to let me take care of things. The taxes, the land, the company, everything's changing. You shouldn't have to deal with it." That's what she said out loud. What she meant was, "You're in my way." I kept quiet. It's a skill you learn as a mother. Silence buys you more truth than arguing. She pulled out a folder with legal papers and started talking about streamlining ownership. Big words, small heart. She pushed a pen toward me. "It's just for convenience, Mom. Nothing changes. You'll still live here." Thomas would have called it what it was, a setup. But I looked at my daughter, the little girl who once cried when her goldfish died, and I thought she wouldn't hurt me, so I signed. She smiled like a realtor closing a sale. "See, that wasn't so hard." Then she kissed my cheek and said, "You'll thank me later." The door closed and the kitchen went quiet. Only the clock ticked, counting how long it takes for trust to expire. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house creaked like it was trying to tell me something. I sat in Thomas's old chair and looked at our wedding photo on the mantel. He'd built this place with his own hands, board by board. We'd fought over curtains, painted walls, raised Rebecca here. Every inch had a memory nailed into it. Next morning I made coffee, fed the cat, and told myself I was overreacting. Then Rebecca showed up again. No coffee, no smile. She stood in the doorway, holding her phone like a weapon. "Mom, I talked to the realtor," she said. "They'll handle everything. You should start packing. Maybe move in with Aunt Martha until the sale's done." I thought I misheard her. "Sale?" She gave me the look people give when explaining Wi-Fi to a grandparent. "Don't be upset. It's just business. You'll be comfortable. I promise." "Comfortable?" I said. "In someone else's house?" She rolled her eyes. "Mom, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. You'll thank me when it's over." Funny thing, people only say "you'll thank me later" when they know you never will. She followed me around the kitchen while I gathered my things. The cat hissed. At least someone was on my side. Rebecca waited at the door, car running outside, impatient. Now I took one last look around. The curtains Thomas hung crooked, the chair with his initials carved underneath, the smell of cedar that never went away. "Let's go, Mom," she said, tapping her watch. I walked out, carrying a suitcase and a thermos. She opened the car door for me, small miracle, and drove. Neither of us spoke. Miles of farmland rolled by, silent witnesses to stupidity. 10 minutes out of town, she slowed the car and pulled over. Gravel crunched under the tyres. "This is far enough," she said flatly. "Far enough for what?" I asked. "For you to figure things out." She looked straight ahead. "The house is mine now." That's when I realised how easy betrayal sounds when it's spoken calmly. I opened the door. My shoes hit the dirt. Before I could say anything, the car lurched forward and she was gone. Taillights shrinking down the road like two tiny lies fading into daylight. I stood there with my suitcase and my thermos. The air smelled like sawdust and burnt oil. Thomas's smell, still following me somehow. No phone, no wallet, just the sound of my own breathing and the echo of my daughter's voice. The house is mine now. I didn't cry. Maybe I should have, but I've never liked giving people the satisfaction. Instead, I looked back toward town and whispered, "You really think you're the only one who can plan ahead?" Before I keep going, tell me something in the comments. What would you have done if it were your daughter? And don't forget to subscribe if you like real family stories that hit close to home. A pickup truck passed, the driver nodding politely like I was just another old lady with bad luck. He didn't know I'd already made my move, the one Rebecca would never see coming. I picked up my suitcase and started walking, slow and steady, the way you do when you've still got one secret left. The sun hit my eyes like it didn't care what happened yesterday. I started walking toward the highway, the sound of my suitcase wheels dragging over gravel. A couple of crows followed me for a bit. Probably thought I was breakfast. Half a mile later, a blue pickup slowed down beside me. The window rolled down and I heard a familiar voice yell, "Helen Carter, what in God's name are you doing out here?" It was Walter Jenkins, my old neighbour and retired lawyer, the kind of man who owned more coffee mugs than sense. He looked exactly the same, flannel shirt, crooked glasses and a moustache that could pass for a pet. "Need a ride or are you practicing for the senior marathon?" he asked. "I've been evicted," I said flatly. He blinked twice. "By who?" "My daughter," I said. Walter let out a long whistle. "That's a new low, even for Maple Hollow. Get in before someone thinks you're hitchhiking to Florida." I climbed in. The seat squeaked like it was judging me. Walter drove slow because that's how old men show empathy, by giving the world time to catch up. "So," he said, glancing over, "you finally did it, didn't you?" I looked at him. "Did what?" "That paperwork we talked about," he said. "The foundation transfer. You actually signed it." I smiled faintly. "Every last page last night." Walter slapped the steering wheel and started laughing. "Oh, this is rich! So your daughter kicked you out of a house that doesn't even belong to her anymore?" I nodded. "Technically, she evicted herself." He laughed harder. "Helen, you sly old fox. You've just written the best chapter of Family Revenge Weekly." "Don't start," I said, but I couldn't help smiling. We reached his place on the edge of town, a leaning house with a mailbox that hadn't stood straight since the Reagan years. Walter called it charm. I called it lazy carpentry. Inside, his kitchen looked like a law office collided with a yard sale. Piles of old case files, newspaper clippings, and what might have been yesterday's pie. He cleared a space on the table with his elbow. "Sit," he said. "Tell me everything, and don't spare the satisfying details." I sat down, feeling the cold metal chair against my back. "There's not much to tell. She had the papers ready. I signed. She smiled. I left. She thinks it's all hers now. But last night, I transferred everything, house, land, savings, to the Hollow Lake Reading Foundation, the same one Thomas started." Walter's grin stretched wider. "The one she called a money pit for old ladies and broken chairs?" "Exactly," I said. He laughed so hard he had to grab a napkin. "So she'll have to go through the library board to sell the property?" "Yes," I said. "And that board meets every Friday morning at the diner. You remember who pours coffee there?" Walter's laughter turned into a wheeze. "Jolene, the ex-girlfriend, still puts 3 sugars in her customers' cups out of spite." "That's the one." Walter wiped his eyes. "Oh, this is poetic justice served with a side of pancakes." I picked at the pie crumbs on the table. "It's not about payback, Walt. I just wanted to protect what Thomas built. He believed in this town even when it forgot him." Walter leaned back. "Sure, Helen, but don't pretend you won't enjoy watching her face when she realizes she's not the landlord anymore." I didn't answer. Truth was, I'd been picturing it all morning. Walter stood, opened his fridge, and pulled out something resembling scrambled eggs. "You're staying here for now," he said. "Guest room's got a bed, a window, and wallpaper with ducks wearing hats. Don't ask." "I wasn't going to," I said. He pointed at me with a fork. "You need rest. Tomorrow will be fun." I didn't know what he meant until later. That night, I lay in the duck room, staring at the ceiling fan that made more noise than movement. My mind kept replaying Rebecca's voice. "The house is mine now." But every time it echoed, I heard Thomas's voice cut through it. "Never build something your heart isn't willing to defend." I must have smiled in my sleep, because when I woke up the next morning, Walter was already in the kitchen, arguing with his toaster. "Damn thing burns one side and freezes the other," he muttered. "It's like living with Congress." He handed me a plate. "Eat up, you'll need energy." "For what?" I asked. He grinned. "For the show." Before I could ask, his radio crackled. The morning host, Edna, had that small-town gossip tone that made every sentence sound like a secret. "Breaking news," she said. "Property records show that the Carter family estate has been transferred to the Hollow Lake Reading Foundation. And get this, Rebecca Carter's signature is missing from the file." "Well, ain't that a twist?" Walter froze, then looked at me. "They just said your name on the radio." "I heard," I said. You're famous, he said. Infamous, I corrected, sipping coffee that tasted like revenge and motor oil. Walter laughed. Oh, Helen, you're about to cause the most polite scandal this town's ever seen. I didn't respond. Out the window, the sun was coming up over Maple Hollow. The same streets Rebecca thought she'd conquered were about to turn on her, not because of anger, but because truth has a habit of showing up uninvited. Walter poured himself another cup. You know, Helen, he said, if this were a TV show, this is where we'd cut to commercial. I smiled. Too bad life doesn't have commercials. Yeah, he said, but it sure has reruns. I laughed quietly, finished my toast, and looked out at the town waking up. Somewhere down there, my daughter was realizing the world didn't belong to her anymore. And for the first time since Thomas passed, the house felt like it was finally in the right hands. The smell of cold coffee and legal paper never really leaves Walter's house. It was there that I told him everything that happened the night before my daughter threw me out. That night started quietly. The house creaked in that way it always did when the temperature dropped, a sound Thomas used to call the walls settling after a long day. I sat by the kitchen table, the same table where Rebecca once did her homework, and listened to the sound of her voice coming from the next room. She was pacing, talking fast, whispering into her phone. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. At 72, hearing isn't exactly my best quality anymore. But she was loud enough that even the cat turned its head. She already signed everything, she said. Yes, it's all under my name now. I'll close the sale by Friday. Silence. Then laughter, hers, short and mean. Don't worry, she won't even realize what happened. She still thinks I'm helping. I stopped breathing for a moment. You can tell when a heart cracks, it makes a sound somewhere between a sigh and a silence. I walked back to the living room, every step louder than it should have been. I didn't confront her. There's no point arguing with someone who's already convinced she's right. I just sat in Thomas's chair next to the fireplace that hadn't seen a flame in months and stared at the papers she'd left on the counter. I didn't need to read them. I already knew. Around 9, when she went to bed, I grabbed my coat and keys. The night air hit me like a wake-up slap. Maple Hollow was quiet, just a few porch lights glowing, the sound of crickets trying to stay alive. I drove down the road until I saw Walter's old mailbox leaning sideways like it was tired of standing. He opened the door wearing a bathrobe that could have been from the Nixon era. "Helen," he said, "please tell me you didn't run over my mailbox again." "Not this time," I said. "I need legal advice." Walter rubbed his eyes. "At 9:30 at night?" "Make it 10, I said. He sighed. "Well, the coffee's terrible, but the company's decent. Come in." His kitchen looked the same as always, organised chaos, legal pads, expired coupons, one lonely donut on a plate. I sat down, and for a few seconds neither of us spoke. Then he said, "So what did she do this time?" I told him. Every word, the papers, the call, the sale. By the end, his jaw was tight enough to crack a tooth. "She tricked you into signing the house over," he asked. "Yes." He swore under his breath. "Helen, you realise she's walking herself into a hornet's nest." "Then maybe I'll help her feel the sting," I said. That got a smirk out of him. "You want to fight back?" "I want to protect what's left," I said. "Not just the house, Thomas's legacy. He didn't build Carter Timber Co., so our daughter could sell it to strangers who've never touched a hammer." Walter leaned back, arms crossed. "You still have time. The papers might be under review for title transfer. And if you want to move ownership somewhere else, you can before it's final." "Where?" I asked. He pointed to a dusty folder sitting on his bookshelf. "The Hollow Lake Reading Foundation. Remember that thing Thomas set up before he passed?" I did remember. Thomas loved that library more than his fishing boat. He always said books were the one thing that could outlast wood. I helped him fill out the paperwork years ago, back when Rebecca still believed in doing the right thing. Walter handed me the folder. "You can transfer the property and assets to the foundation. It's legal, clean and poetic. Your daughter can't undo it without the board's approval, and last I checked, they're more stubborn than you are." I looked at him. "That's impossible," he grinned. "Helen, please, I've been retired for 15 years. Impossible is what keeps me awake." He started typing on his old laptop, the one that wheezed every time it processed a sentence. Within an hour, the new transfer papers were ready. He called his friend at the county clerk's office, who still owed him a favour from the 80s, and got the notary to stay late. At 11:47 p.m, I signed my name again, but this time I knew exactly what I was signing. Walter looked at me over the top of his glasses. Once this is filed, there's no undoing it. You'll be giving up ownership permanently. I already lost it, I said. I'm just deciding who gets to keep it. He nodded slowly. You're a better chess player than I thought. I learned from Thomas, I said. He always told me, don't fight for what's yours, fight for what's right. Walter handed me the last copy and leaned back. You realise what's about to happen when she finds out? I do, I said, and I'll deal with it. He chuckled softly. I'd pay to see her face. I smiled for the first time that day. Me too. We finished the paperwork, sealed everything, and he locked the folder in his metal filing cabinet, which probably hadn't been dusted since Bush Sr. I left just after midnight. The night was still. No cars, no wind, just me and the sound of tyres crunching against gravel as I drove home for what I knew would be the last time as its owner. The porch light flickered when I pulled in. I stood there for a moment, staring at the front door, the wood Thomas cut himself, the window she'd always drawn hearts on as a kid. It didn't feel like an ending. It felt like reclaiming something invisible. I walked inside, fed the cat, and sat down with a pen and an envelope. I wrote Rebecca a note. Not a goodbye, just something simple. Be careful what you try to take, sweetheart. Some things aren't yours to sell. I left it on the counter next to her papers. Then I turned off the lights, locked the door, and let the night carry the rest of the story for me. Walter's guest room smelled like mothballs and regret, but it was warm, and that was more than I had yesterday. The wallpaper had little ducks wearing hats, one of those jokes people make in the 70s and never fix. The bed creaked every time I breathed, but at least I wasn't on the side of the road anymore. Walter had left a folded blanket at the end of the bed and a note on the dresser that said, "The coffee's bad, but it's hot. Help yourself." The man wasn't sentimental, but that was his version of caring. The next morning, I found him in the kitchen reading a newspaper older than both of us. He was eating cereal that looked more like gravel than food. "You sleep okay?" he asked without looking up. "As good as anyone sleeping in a museum of bad wallpaper," I said. He grinned. "That room builds character. Then I must be a saint by now." He laughed, folded the paper and finally looked at me. "So what's your plan, Helen? Going to hide out here forever?" I poured myself a cup of what he called coffee and what I'd call burnt disappointment. No plan yet, just catching my breath. Walter leaned back. "You always had a plan, even when you didn't admit it. That's what scared the hell out of Thomas back in the day." I smiled a little. Thomas used to say I planned my grocery lists like a military operation. "He wasn't wrong," Walter said. "You didn't just transfer that house last night because you were angry. You did it because you saw the end game before anyone else." I didn't argue. There wasn't much point pretending otherwise. The truth was, I hadn't acted out of rage. I'd done it because Thomas had taught me one thing. If you care about something, you protect it before it's gone. Walter kept talking, the way lonely men do when they have an audience. "You know, when your husband started that reading fund, he told me he wanted it to outlive all of us, said education was the one kind of wood that doesn't rot." "He said that?" "Sure did," Walter said, "right before he broke my hammer." That got a laugh out of me, the first real one in days. Walter looked satisfied. "There she is, the Helen Carter I remember, smiling right before she burns down a problem." "I'm not burning anything," I said, just redirecting the fire. He nodded approvingly. "That's even worse for them. You know, the town's going to find out soon. They always do. News here travels faster than the mail." He wasn't wrong. Maple Hollow had a population of about 3,000 people, and 2,000 of them probably already knew I'd been kicked out. The other 1,000 would hear by lunch. Walter walked over to the window, looked out at the quiet street and said, "You should take a walk later, Bennett. Let people see you're fine. They'll expect you to disappear to be humiliated. Don't give them that satisfaction." "That's a very lawyer thing to say," he shrugged. "I charge extra for wisdom." The day passed slowly. I cleaned his kitchen because it gave me something to do. He pretended not to notice, but thanked me twice. By afternoon, the radio was on again. Same voice, same cheerful tone from Edna the host. "And in local news," she said, "rumour has it the Carter estate has changed hands overnight. Official records list the Hollow Lake Reading Foundation as the new owner." "Well, isn't that something?" Walter turned down the volume and raised an eyebrow. "Showtime." I just sipped my coffee. "Rebecca will hear that by now." "Oh, she's probably already on the phone screaming at someone," he said. "Let's just hope it's not me." We both laughed, but under it I could feel a weight pressing on my chest. Not guilt, just the kind of ache that comes when love and disappointment share the same seat. Later that evening, Walter made dinner, which was mostly overcooked pasta and undercooked logic. He poured us both a glass of wine from a bottle he claimed was saved for emergencies. "This count as one?" I asked. He nodded. "If getting kicked out by your own daughter doesn't qualify, I don't know what does." We ate in silence for a while. The air between us was comfortable, like two people sitting with their own ghosts. After dinner, Walter leaned back in his chair. "You know, I once had a client who sued his own son for stealing his car. Kid claimed it was a misunderstanding. You know what the judge said?" He said, "Misunderstanding is what thieves call foresight." I smiled faintly. "Sounds like something you'd say." "It was something I said," he replied. "The judge just stole it." We both laughed again, but mine faded faster. "I don't want to fight Rebecca in court, Walter. I just want her to understand what she did." He looked serious for the first time all day. "She will. Sooner or later, she'll realise the house was never about money." "Then what was it about?" I asked. He looked down at his glass. "Belonging, the thing every kid wants and every adult forgets to give back." That one hit me harder than I expected. It was quiet again after that. Walter dozed off in his chair, muttering something about taxes. I sat there watching the light flicker against the window. Outside, the air had that heavy stillness that always came before small-town gossip erupted like wildfire. I walked out to his porch and looked down the road toward town. Somewhere out there, Rebecca was probably realising her perfect plan had a hole in it big enough to drive her ego through. But even now, part of me hoped she'd figure things out, not because I wanted her to suffer, but because I wanted her to learn. The way Thomas and I learned everything that mattered. The hard way. The porch creaked under my feet, the same way our old house used to. It was the kind of sound that reminded me no matter how far you go, wood still remembers who built it. I leaned on the railing, breathed in the night air, and thought about how strange it felt to lose everything and still feel like I'd finally done something right. By mid-morning, Walter's kitchen smelled like burnt toast and panic. His radio was still tuned to Edna's morning show, which had apparently turned into the Maple Hollow version of breaking news. "Word around town," Edna said in that syrupy voice, "is that the Carter family estate is no longer family-owned. Records confirm it now belongs to the Hollow Lake Reading Foundation. What a twist, folks. You never know what's cooking in this town until it's served cold." Walter snorted into his coffee. "Served cold. She's quoting revenge movies now." I took another sip and said, "She's about to have more material." He laughed, and just then the phone rang. He looked at the caller ID, grinned, and said, "Speak of the devil." He handed me the phone. "It's your daughter." I let it ring once more before picking up. "Good morning, Rebecca." Her voice came out like static. "What the hell did you do, Mom?" "I followed your advice," I said. "You told me to let go, so I did." "You transferred everything to some charity?" "You can't do that." "I can, and I did. The paperwork's public record, sweetheart. Maybe next time you'll read before you sign." "You've ruined me," she shouted. "No," I said quietly. "You did that when you forgot what this family stood for." There was silence for a second, then the click of her hanging up. Walter chuckled. "She took that about as well as a cat in a bathtub." "Let's not celebrate too soon," I said. "She'll find a way to make noise." "Oh, she will," Walter said. "But at least you get a front row seat." Within an hour, the town was buzzing. Maple Hollow didn't have much in the way of entertainment, so when gossip showed up, everyone bought a ticket. The hardware store clerk called the diner waitress, who told the barber, who told the pastor, who told his wife, who told the entire knitting circle. By lunchtime, I was no longer Helen Carter, widow of Thomas Carter. I was that woman who outsmarted her own daughter. Walter and I went into town for groceries because he claimed he was out of food and dignity. As soon as we stepped into the general store, the cashier stopped mid-scan and said, "Mrs. Carter, you're trending." "I'm what?" She pointed at her phone. The Maple Hollow Gazette posted the story online. Local mother outsmarts daughter in property twist. It's already got 200 comments. That's practically viral for us. Walter leaned on the counter. "Told you the internet would love you." "Fantastic," I said. "Maybe next week they'll build me a statue outside the library." A man behind us in line said, "Make sure it's holding a contract." The store laughed and I just shook my head. I didn't feel proud. Not yet. Mostly I felt tired. The kind of tired you get from realizing the people you love are the ones you have to defend yourself from. As we left the store, Walter elbowed me. "You notice how they're all smiling at you now? This town loves a comeback story." I didn't answer. I saw something else. Rebecca's SUV parked across the street, right outside Town Hall. She was standing by the steps, phone in one hand, folder in the other, talking to someone who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Her lawyer, probably. Walter saw her too. "You want to leave?" "No," I said. "Let her see me." We walked right past her. Her voice rose, sharp and defensive, like someone used to being in control. When she saw me, she stopped mid-sentence. For a second, her face softened, like she might say something human. Then it hardened again. "You think this is funny?" she said. "I think it's ironic," I replied. "You've humiliated me," she snapped. "Rebecca, you did that yourself." "I just stopped funding it." Her lawyer stepped in. "Mrs. Carter, maybe this isn't the place." "You're right," I said. "The library is. It owns the property now." Walter choked on his laughter beside me. "I told you, this town's about to explode." We left her standing there, shaking with anger. When we got back to the truck, Walter said, "You realize she's going to the courthouse next?" "Let her," I said. "She'll find out what it's like to argue with a wall of paperwork." The courthouse clerk, Edna's cousin, was a talker. Within an hour, the entire staff knew that Rebecca Carter had stormed in demanding to reverse the deed, only to be told she had no legal standing. The law was clear, and my signature was final. By late afternoon, the town radio gave another update. Edna couldn't resist. And in our top story today, looks like karma made a house call. Helen Carter's property transfer stands. That's one for the history books, folks. Walter turned up the volume. "You hear that? That's the sound of justice with jazz music." I laughed quietly. "She'll hate every second of this." He nodded. "Good. Maybe she'll finally slow down long enough to think." The rest of the day felt strange. People waved at me on the street. Strangers stopped to say, "Good for you." It wasn't fame, it was small-town approval, which is like fame but with more gossip and pie. Still, part of me felt something heavier. I didn't want to win. I just wanted to stop losing. That night, I sat on Walter's porch, watching the streetlights flicker on. The air smelled of wood smoke and pride swallowed too late. He came out with 2 cups of cocoa and sat beside me. "You know, Helen," he said, "most people talk about revenge like it's fireworks, loud, bright, and over in a second. But what you did, this is slow-burn justice. Quiet, legal, unstoppable." "I didn't want revenge," I said. "I wanted peace." He nodded. "Same thing, if you do it right." We sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that says more than words ever could. Somewhere down the street, I could hear the faint hum of Rebecca's car engine as she drove off again, probably to find someone else to blame. The sky above Maple Hollow turned a soft pink, the way it always did before sunset. I watched it fade and thought about how endings never look the way you expect. Some come with fireworks, others arrive disguised as calm. By the next morning, Walter's phone hadn't stopped ringing. Everyone wanted a quote, a statement, or just to confirm the story was real. Small towns love drama as long as it's not their own. Walter answered one call, rolled his eyes and said, "No, she didn't break any laws. Yes, she's still my friend. No, you can't interview her." Then he hung up and muttered, "These people need more hobbies." I sat at the kitchen table, buttering a piece of toast that tasted exactly like old revenge, dry and necessary. The radio was on again because Walter treated it like oxygen. The announcer was reading an opinion piece about me. Some folks say Helen Carter taught her daughter a lesson in justice. Others say she went too far. Either way, you can't say she didn't play the long game. Walter smirked. "They're not wrong." I shook my head. I didn't play anything. I just made sure Thomas's work didn't end up in the hands of someone who sees dollar signs instead of sawdust. He chuckled. That's poetic. You sure you don't want to write a book? How to outsmart your kids without going to jail? Before I could answer, there was a loud knock on the door. 3 sharp hits that didn't sound like politeness. Walter groaned. Guess who? The second I opened the door, Rebecca pushed past me, heels clicking like gunshots on the wood floor. She was furious, red-faced, and breathing like someone who'd lost an argument with herself. Congratulations, Mom, she snapped. You've officially become the town's favourite villain. Morning to you too, I said. Walter leaned against the counter, arms crossed, enjoying the show. Coffee, Rebecca? You look like you need one. She ignored him. You think this is funny? No, I said calmly. It's just peaceful, which is new for me. You humiliated me, she shouted. My business partners backed out. My name's a joke, and everyone's talking about how the old lady beat me at my own game. I met her eyes. You were the one playing games, Rebecca. I just stopped keeping score. She looked around the kitchen like she was searching for a reason not to explode. You don't get it, do you? You've destroyed everything. Walter spoke up. She protected what was already destroyed, sweetheart. You just didn't notice when you did it. Rebecca turned on him. Stay out of this! I'd love to, he said, sipping his coffee, but you're yelling in my kitchen. She glared at him, then at me. You always do this. You make me the bad guy. I leaned against the table. You made choices, Rebecca. Adults don't get to blame other people for those. She threw her hands in the air. You think this makes you the hero? You ruined my reputation, my work, my future. Your reputation ruined itself, I said, voice low but steady, and your future's still right there if you stop tripping over your pride. For a second, the room was silent except for the ticking clock. Then, she grabbed her purse and said, You can keep your stupid house and your stupid moral lessons. I hope you're happy living off your charity. Walter raised his coffee cup. Technically, it's the town's charity now. She stormed toward the door, muttering words the preacher would have fainted over. Before she stepped outside, I said, Rebecca. She stopped but didn't turn around. I don't hate you, I said. I just won't let you erase what we built. She didn't answer. The door slammed so hard a picture frame rattled off the wall. Walter caught it before it hit the floor and set it back upright. You know, he said, if I didn't like you so much, I'd start charging rent for all this entertainment. I smiled faintly. I'm glad someone's having fun. She'll calm down, he said. I know, but I'm not sure she'll forgive. He took another sip of coffee. You'd be surprised. Pride burns hot, but it burns out faster than love. We both sat down again, letting the quiet settle in. Outside, I could hear distant laughter from a group of kids walking home from school. Life didn't stop for anyone, not even for family feuds. That evening, as the sky turned orange, I walked to the edge of the porch. Across the field, the Carter house glowed in the fading light. Rebecca's car was gone. The curtains were open, but the place looked emptier than I'd ever seen it. It didn't look like a victory. It looked like loss wearing a fancy coat. Walter came up beside me, holding 2 mugs. You thinking about moving back in there? I shook my head. No, that's her space to figure out now. I just made sure it would still be there when she learns what home really means. He nodded. You know, I think Thomas would have liked that answer. I smiled, watching a flock of birds cut across the sky. He would have said I took too long to get there. Walter laughed. Yeah, but he'd also say you finally nailed it. For the first time in days, I felt something like peace. Not the kind that comes from winning, but the kind that comes from finally being done defending yourself. I didn't feel like a victim or a hero, just a woman who stopped apologizing for being right. As the last bit of sunlight slipped behind the trees, I could still hear Walter muttering to himself about his toaster and taxes. And for once, I was grateful for the noise. It reminded me that sometimes life doesn't end with a bang or a breakdown. It just keeps going, one imperfect, honest day at a time. By Friday, the entire town had an opinion. Maple Hollow hadn't been this divided since the mayor banned leaf burning. Half the people said I was a genius. The other half said I was a heartless old woman. Everyone said it loud enough to be overheard. Walter found the whole thing entertaining. They're talking about you like you're a Netflix series, he said. If you hear theme music playing when you walk into the diner, don't be surprised. The diner was the unofficial courtroom of Maple Hollow. That's where verdicts were handed out, between pancakes and coffee refills. When Walter and I walked in, the place went quiet for about 3 seconds. Then the low hum of whispers returned like static. I could feel eyes turning. Edna, the waitress and local news anchor by night, gave me a look that was half curiosity, half approval. "Morning, Helen," she said. "You caused quite the stir." I smiled politely. "I heard." Walter ordered pancakes and bacon, as if this were a normal breakfast and not a public trial. Across the room, 2 old men from the hardware store were arguing. "She had every right to do it," one said. "If my son tried that, I'd do worse." The other shook his head. "Still her daughter, Bill?" Family's family." "Yeah," Bill said, "and sometimes family needs to learn the hard way." Walter nudged me. "That one's on your side." "I'm not keeping score," I said, though a tiny part of me was. The mayor walked in while we were eating. Small man, big opinions. He strutted over like someone rehearsing authority. "Helen Carter," he said, "we need to discuss the effect your little stunt is having on the local economy." Walter almost spit out his coffee. "Stunt?" The mayor ignored him. "Carter Timber employs half this town. If your daughter can't keep it running, we could have layoffs." I set down my fork. "So my choices are let my daughter sell our history or take the blame for saving it?" He frowned. "It's complicated." "It's not," I said. "If the town depends on one company to survive, maybe it's time they learn how to read the job board again." Walter grinned. "She's got you there, Mayor." The mayor cleared his throat and left without finishing his coffee. Walter leaned over. "You just argued him out of his appetite. That's rare." After breakfast, we stopped by the town hall because Walter said I should show my face. I didn't know what that meant, but apparently in Maple Hollow it meant standing in a crowded room while people whispered your name. The meeting was already in progress. A group of residents sat on folding chairs discussing the Carter situation like it was a natural disaster. One woman said, "I just don't understand how a mother could do that to her own child." Another replied, "I don't understand how a child could do that to her mother." The moderator tried to calm them down, but it was like trying to mediate a thunderstorm. Then someone noticed me standing in the doorway. "Well," the moderator said, awkwardly, "looks like Mrs. Carter's here. Maybe she'd like to say something." The room went silent again. Every head turned. Walter whispered, "Now's your moment, Atticus Finch." I stepped forward. "I'm not here to defend myself," I said. "I just came to remind everyone that houses are made of wood, but homes are made of people. And when someone forgets that, sometimes you have to protect one from the other." Murmurs filled the room. I continued, "I didn't take anything from my daughter. I just gave it back to the town her father loved. That's all." Someone in the back clapped once, slowly, like they were testing the water. Then others joined in. Not everyone, but enough to make the air feel lighter. When the meeting ended, Walter and I walked outside. He looked impressed. "Speech. It was a sentence," I said. "I'm too old for speeches." We stopped by the notice board outside Town Hall. Someone had already pinned up a copy of the local newspaper. "Mother outsmarts daughter in legal twist, town divided." Beneath it, someone scribbled in pen, "Or maybe she just did what was right." Walter grinned. "You're practically folklore now." "Great," I said. "Next week, they'll start selling postcards." We passed the library on the way back. It was quiet inside, as always. Mrs. Halloway, the librarian, waved through the window. She had been running that place since before Rebecca was born. I'd forgotten how peaceful it was there, how the air smelled like dust and stories. Walter glanced at me. "You know, it's kind of fitting. The same place your husband wanted to protect is now the one thing your daughter can't touch." I smiled faintly. Thomas would have liked that. As we got back to his house, Walter checked his answering machine. 3 new messages, all about me. The last one was from Rebecca's lawyer, his tone halfway between confused and furious. "Mr. Jenkins, we've reviewed the deed transfer. It's airtight. There's nothing to contest. Tell your client congratulations. She's officially untouchable." Walter played it twice just for the satisfaction. "Untouchable," he repeated. "That has a nice ring to it." "I'm not untouchable," I said. "I'm just done being taken advantage of." He nodded. "That's even better." The rest of the day, I stayed outside on his porch watching cars drive by. Every once in a while, someone honked, some waved, not all friendly waves, but I'd take it. By sunset, the air had cooled, and Walter joined me with 2 glasses of lemonade. "You know, Helen," he said, "I think you scared the town into thinking twice before they mess with their parents." "I doubt that," I said. "They'll forget by Monday." He chuckled. "Maybe, but for now they're talking about justice instead of gossip. That's a win." I took a sip, the lemonade tart enough to sting. "If it is, I'll take it." Out on the horizon, the lights of the Carter property glowed faintly. Somewhere in that house, my daughter was still angry, still trying to make sense of a world that no longer bent her way. I didn't wish her pain. I just hoped that when the noise faded, she'd finally hear the lesson behind the silence. Walter's porch creaked under our feet as the sun dropped behind the trees. He was still talking about the town hall meeting like it was the Super Bowl, but my mind had wandered somewhere else. Back to the house, to Thomas, and to all the things I hadn't said in years. When the air cooled enough to bite, I went inside to make tea. Walter stayed outside, probably arguing with the mosquitoes. While I waited for the kettle to boil, I noticed a small wooden box on the corner shelf. It was Thomas's, the one Walter had been keeping since the funeral. I never asked for it back. Walter came in, brushing his sleeves. "You planning to open that, or just stare at it till it confesses?" "I don't remember what's inside," I said. "Then find out," he replied. "Life's too short for mystery boxes." The lid squeaked when I lifted it. Inside were a few photographs, a broken wristwatch, and an envelope yellowed at the edges. My name was written on the front in Thomas's handwriting, still firm, still the same way he'd sign grocery lists and birthday cards. Walter saw my face and stepped back. "You want me to leave?" "No," I said. "He probably expected you to be here anyway." I opened the envelope carefully. The paper inside had thinned with age, but the ink hadn't faded. I read the first line out loud because my hands were shaking too much to keep quiet. "Helen, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer around to argue with you, so please don't start yelling." Walter chuckled under his breath. "That sounds like him." I kept reading. "If Rebecca ever forgets what love built, remind her with what love protects. Don't fight her with anger, Helen. Fight her with something she'll never understand until she earns it, grace." The words blurred for a second, and I realized my eyes were wet. I hadn't cried when Thomas died. I'd been too busy holding everyone else together. But sitting there now, reading his handwriting, I felt something unclench. Walter handed me a napkin, pretending not to notice. "He always did know how to get the last word," he said softly. "If you ever have to choose between saving what's yours and saving what's right," the letter continued, "pick the second one. You'll sleep better." I folded the paper slowly. It wasn't advice, it was permission. Walter leaned back in his chair. "You know, I think he saw this coming." "Rebecca?" I asked. "Not the specifics," he said, "but he knew you two would clash someday. You're both too smart for your own good." I smiled faintly. "She got that from him." "She got the stubbornness from you," he said. "Don't look offended. It's your best trait." I didn't answer. The letter sat on the table between like a third person in the room. For years I'd blamed myself for Rebecca's attitude, thinking maybe I'd pushed her too hard, given her too much freedom, or not enough. But maybe this was just the part where a parent has to let the next generation stumble on their own. Walter poured us both another cup of tea. "So what are you going to do with that letter?" "Keep it," I said, "and hope she earns the right to read it someday." He nodded approvingly. "Fair. Not sure the town's ready for that level of maturity, though." The rest of the night passed quietly. Walter dozed off in his chair halfway through a rerun of Jeopardy, while I sat there tracing the lines of Thomas's signature at the bottom of the page. He'd signed it the same way he signed the foundation paperwork all those years ago. Somehow it felt like he'd written this for me just last week. When I finally went to bed, the letter was still in my hand. The ducks on the wallpaper looked smug, like they knew something I didn't. I placed the envelope on the nightstand and turned off the lamp. For the first time since Rebecca's betrayal, I fell asleep without feeling angry. The next morning I woke up early, made toast and read the letter again. The words felt heavier in daylight, like a set of directions for the rest of my life. Walter shuffled into the kitchen, hair sticking up in every direction. "You look peaceful," he said. "Should I be worried?" Thomas left me homework, I said. He raised an eyebrow. Posthumous homework? That's a new one. I handed him the letter. He read it quietly, then folded it neatly and gave it back. He was a good man, he said. He was, I said, and a better teacher than I realized. Walter poured coffee and leaned against the counter. You know what's funny? Every time you think the story's over, it just keeps teaching you something else. I smiled. That's not funny. That's marriage. We both laughed, and for a moment, the house didn't feel borrowed anymore. It felt like a place meant for healing. Outside, the town was waking up. A delivery truck rumbled past and a group of school kids walked by, backpacks bouncing. I stood by the window and watched them disappear down the street. Somewhere out there, Rebecca was probably trying to fix the mess she'd made, or pretending she didn't care. Either way, Thomas's letter had already done its job. I folded it one last time, slid it into my coat pocket, and told Walter I was going for a walk. Heading to the library? He asked. Maybe, I said. Seems like a good place to visit something that survived us all. He smiled knowingly. If you find any more secret letters, try not to start a revolution this time. No promises, I said. I stepped outside, breathing in the cold air. The streets of Maple Hollow looked ordinary again. Kids running, people talking, the world spinning like it always did. But to me, everything had shifted. I wasn't walking away from what had happened anymore. I was walking toward whatever came next, with Thomas's words in my pocket and a little bit of peace where the anger used to be. The air smelled like rain before the first cloud showed up. Maple Hollow had that way of warning you, a stillness that felt too quiet, like the world was holding its breath. I'd barely finished my morning tea when Walter looked out the window and said, Well, the weather's got your daughter's mood written all over it. He wasn't wrong. By noon, dark clouds gathered above the town, heavy and impatient. Thunder rolled in the distance, low and slow, like something deciding whether to forgive. I was standing on Walter's porch, watching the wind pick up, when I heard the sound of tyres skidding on wet gravel. Rebecca's SUV. Even before she stepped out, I could feel the tension crackling in the air, louder than the thunder. She slammed the door so hard it rattled Walter's porch railing. You think you can ruin my life and hide here? She shouted. Walter appeared behind me with a coffee mug and muttered, Here comes the weather report. Rebecca's face was red, her hair wild from the wind, and her voice shook. Not just with anger, but something else. You can't just give away my inheritance, Mom. That house, Dad built it for our family. It was supposed to be mine. I met her eyes. He built it for us, Rebecca, not for you to sell. She took a step closer, hands trembling. You don't get it. I had plans, investors. I was finally building something of my own. I kept my voice calm. Then build something, but not on top of what someone else gave you. The rain started just then, fat drops splattering against the porch. Walter, ever the tactful observer, said, If you two are going to yell, can we at least do it inside before lightning joins in? Neither of us moved. Rebecca shook her head. You're unbelievable. You always act you're teaching me some grand lesson, like I'm still a kid who doesn't know better. I wanted to say something kind. Instead, I said what was true. If you knew better, we wouldn't be standing here. Her jaw clenched. You think this is noble? That letter you left? That stunt with the foundation? It's pathetic! Walter stepped forward. Hey now! Stay out of this, she snapped at him, then turned back to me. You're just bitter and jealous because I actually tried to do something with my life. The rain was pouring by then, soaking her hair, plastering it to her face. She looked less like a villain and more like a child who'd run out of words. I spoke softly. Rebecca? I don't want your life ruined. I just wanted you to remember what Dad stood for. What we stood for. You think quoting Dad makes this better? She yelled. You think hiding behind his memory excuses what you did? The thunder cracked close enough to shake the porch. Walter muttered, Well, if that's not symbolism, I don't know what is. She turned on him again. You helped her with this, didn't you? Walter blinked. Guilty as charged, but only because I like justice and good coffee. Rebecca glared, but she didn't respond. Instead, she looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in weeks. The anger was still there, but it wasn't alone. There was confusion, fear, maybe even regret hiding behind it. Her voice broke when she said, Do you even care what this does to me? I wanted to tell her everything. That I still kept her childhood drawings in a box, that I still checked her old bedroom when I passed by the house, that I'd give anything for one honest conversation that didn't turn into a war. But instead I said, yes, I care. That's why I did it. She froze. Rain ran down her face like tears she refused to own. Walter, who had been pretending to clean his glasses just to stay out of it, finally spoke. You know, kid, sometimes a parent's love looks a lot like revenge. But it's not. It's just disappointment with better paperwork. Rebecca blinked, caught between laughing and crying. You think this is funny? He shrugged. Not funny, just human. She turned back to me, quieter now. So what happens next? You expect me to, what? Work at that library? Beg for permission to live in my own home? I took a breath. No, I expect you to decide what kind of person you want to be. You can fight me for what's gone, or you can build something worth keeping. The rain softened into a drizzle. Rebecca's eyes darted between me and the road, like she wanted to leave but didn't know where she'd go. She finally said, You always find a way to make me feel small. I shook my head. No, I'm trying to make you see how big you could be. She looked away, shoulders trembling. Then, without another word, she walked to her car. Her tyres splashed through puddles as she sped down the road, leaving behind a faint echo of the storm. Walter sighed and set his coffee down. Well, he said, I'd say that went better than expected. I sat on the porch railing, watching the rain fade to mist. You think she'll ever understand? He shrugged. Maybe not today, but one day she'll look back and realise you didn't take anything from her. You gave her a lesson that won't depreciate. I smiled faintly. That sounds like something you'd put on a mug. Already did, he said. Sold 3 at the farmer's market. The sky began to clear and sunlight broke through the clouds, turning the wet road into a mirror. The storm was over, at least for now. I could still see the faint tyre marks where she'd driven away. Walter leaned against the post beside me. You know, Helen, storms have a way of washing things clean, whether we ask them to or not. Or they just show us what's left when the noise stops, I said. He nodded. Either way, you're standing in the quiet now. That's something. The last drops of rain hit the porch roof like punctuation marks at the end of a long sentence, and for the first time that day, the air finally felt light again. The day after the storm, Maple Hollow felt quieter, as if the rain had washed away not just dirt, but gossip too. The streets were slick and shining, the air cool and clean. Walter was sitting at the kitchen table when I came in, fiddling with his radio antenna like he was tuning the universe. Morning, sunshine, he said. Your name's still on the airwaves. The Gazette printed another piece, a mother's revenge or a daughter's wake-up call. I raised an eyebrow. They're running out of headlines. They'll milk it till next week's bake sale, he said. Small-town journalism thrives on moral panic. I poured coffee and leaned against the counter. Let them write what they want. The truth's not changing. Walter looked up. Speaking of truth, you planning to see Rebecca again? Not unless she comes to me, I said. I've done my part. He nodded slowly. Maybe, but lessons don't stick unless you let people wrestle with them. Sometimes the hardest thing is waiting for them to understand. I didn't answer. Waiting had never been my strength. The phone rang just then. One of those old rotary ones Walter refused to replace. He answered, said a few polite words, then covered the receiver. It's Edna. She says Rebecca's at the library. I blinked. At the library? She's been there since morning. Asked for Mrs. Halloway, said she wanted to talk about volunteering. You didn't send her, did you? I shook my head. No. Maybe she finally realised what her father built. Walter grinned. Well, either she's having an epiphany or plotting a hostile takeover of the biography section. Guess I'll find out, I said, grabbing my coat. The library sat at the corner of Main and Pine, an old brick building that had aged beautifully, just enough cracks to prove it had survived things. When I pushed the door open, the smell of old paper and polish filled the air. It was a smell that always reminded me of Thomas. Inside, the world was quiet except for the faint hum of the ceiling fan and the squeak of shoes against linoleum. Then I saw her. Rebecca stood behind the front desk, talking to Mrs. Halloway. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't scowling. She was just listening. When she noticed me, her posture stiffened for a second, but she didn't run. That was new. "Hi, Mom," she said softly. It was the first time she'd used Mom in months. "Hi," I replied. "I hear you're taking an interest in literacy." She half smiled. I thought maybe I should see what the big deal was. Mrs. Halloway cleared her throat like she was excusing herself from a sacred moment. "I'll let you two talk. Don't break anything, please." Once she was gone, I walked over to the desk. "So," I said, "what brings you here?" Rebecca looked around, her fingers tracing the edge of a book on the counter. "Mrs. Halloway told me about the foundation, about how Dad started it for the town. I didn't know." "You never asked," I said gently. "I was too busy trying to be successful," she said, her voice cracking slightly on the word. "Turns out that doesn't mean what I thought it did." I didn't interrupt. Sometimes silence is the only safe place for truth." She went on, "When I came here, I thought it would make me angry, seeing Dad's name everywhere, seeing what you did, but then I watched a couple of kids reading in the corner, and I don't know, it felt different. Like maybe this place mattered more than I wanted to admit." Her eyes met mine. "You could have told me, you know." "I tried," I said. "You just weren't ready to hear it yet." She looked down. "I was selfish. You were human," I said. "And maybe I was too. I could have handled things better." That made her look up again, surprised. "You're not angry?" "I was," I admitted. "But anger doesn't build anything. It just burns what's left. Your father used to say that when people you love disappoint you, you can either punish them or teach them. I wanted to do both, but teaching felt kinder." She smiled faintly. "You've always been better at that than I am." "I had more years to practice," I said. We both laughed softly, the sound awkward but real. After a pause, she said, "Mrs. Halloway offered me a part-time job, maintenance helping around. I told her I'd think about it." "That's good," I said. "She's tough but fair. She once fired a volunteer for dog-earing a dictionary." Rebecca laughed, and it sounded almost like the way she used to laugh when she was a teenager sneaking cookies at midnight. Her voice was quiet when she said, "I don't know how to fix what I did." "You don't," I said. "You just start doing better. The rest will follow." She nodded slowly, then asked, "Would Dad be proud of me, even after all this?" I looked toward the portrait of Thomas hanging above the reading corner, his kind smile frozen in time. "He already is," I said, "because you're finally trying to build something that lasts." For a long moment, we both just stood there, listening to the sound of pages turning somewhere in the background. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was something close. Walter showed up 10 minutes later with 2 coffees, like he couldn't stand the idea of missing drama. When he saw us talking calmly, he stopped in the doorway. "Well, I'll be damned," he said. "The apocalypse really did bring peace." Rebecca rolled her eyes. "Hi, Walter," he grinned. "You're talking to your mother again? That's progress. I give it 2 days before you start calling her for recipes." She smiled. "Don't push it." I looked at him. "You really have no sense of timing, do you?" "None," he said proudly, setting the coffee down on a side table. "But I do make excellent entrances." We all laughed. For the first time, the air between us didn't feel like a battlefield. It felt like a bridge finally being rebuilt, plank by plank, word by word. Rebecca picked up one of the books on the counter, To Kill a Mockingbird, and said, "Dad made me read this once. I didn't understand it back then." "You will now," I said. She nodded, holding it close like a truce offering. And for once, she didn't look like the woman who threw me out of my own home. She looked like the girl who used to fall asleep reading stories on my lap, back when home was something simple. Walter leaned against the doorframe and said, "Well, looks like the library's got new staff and fewer grudges. Guess miracles still happen in Maple Hollow." No one disagreed. The following week, Rebecca showed up at the library every morning before opening hours. No announcement, no fanfare, just her car pulling up quietly, the sound of the engine cutting off, and her walking inside with that awkward mix of determination and shame people carry when they're trying to start over. Mrs. Halloway, who'd seen more redemption arcs than a Sunday sermon, didn't make it easy. The first thing she said on Rebecca's first day was, "If you think mopping is beneath you, there's the door. We only keep humble people and good stories here." Rebecca just nodded. "Where's the mop?" I watched from my usual seat near the window, pretending to read, but really just studying her. The same woman who'd once ordered contractors around like a foreman now struggled to untangle a vacuum cord. She wasn't graceful about it. She dropped things, cursed under her breath, and at one point nearly took out an entire display of cookbooks. But she kept going. Walter stopped by around noon, holding a brown bag that smelled suspiciously like diner fries. "So," he whispered, settling beside me, "how's our little apprentice librarian doing?" "She hasn't quit yet," I said. "That's more than I expected," he said, passing me half the fries. We sat there eating in silence, the kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled. Every few minutes I'd catch Rebecca glancing at the photo of her father on the wall, Thomas smiling, holding a stack of books at the groundbreaking ceremony 30 years ago. She'd pause for a second, then go back to work. Around closing time, I helped her restock the returned books. She looked exhausted, but lighter. "You okay?" I asked. "Yeah," she said, wiping her forehead with the back of her hand. "I forgot how much thinking happens when you're not talking." I smiled. "That's the library's secret power. It shuts you up long enough to hear yourself." She laughed quietly. "I think Dad would have liked that. He would have loved it," I said. "He always said silence is where people grow roots." That night, she drove me home. The car smelled like floor cleaner and cinnamon gum. Neither of us spoke much, but the air didn't feel heavy anymore. Before I got out, she said, "Mom, thanks for not giving up on me." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw pieces of the girl who used to dance barefoot on our porch when the rain came. "I never did," I said. "You just made it hard to show." The next morning, Walter showed up at my door wearing a shirt loud enough to scare birds. "Town Hall's holding a ceremony for the library's new renovation," he said. "They're dedicating the reading hall to Thomas Carter. You coming?" "Wouldn't miss it," I said. When we arrived, the place was packed. The mayor was there again, still short, still self-important, but this time even he looked genuinely happy. The air buzzed with small-town pride. Cameras flashing, reporters pretending to be professional, and old folks dabbing their eyes before the speeches even started. Rebecca was helping organise chairs, directing people, fixing name tags, doing all the small things no one notices but everyone needs. She wasn't running the show. She was supporting it. And that alone was enough to make my chest tighten. When Mrs. Halloway took the microphone, she started with a joke about overdue books, then gestured to the plaque covered by a velvet cloth. "We're gathered here today to honour the legacy of Thomas Carter, who believed that learning wasn't just for the young, but for anyone brave enough to keep growing." The crowd clapped. Rebecca looked at me, eyes wet. I squeezed her hand. Then the mayor called my name. I hadn't planned to speak, but apparently the town decided otherwise. Walter nudged me. "Go on, Professor, time to make them cry." I walked to the front, holding onto the edge of the podium like it might run away. The room was full of faces, some kind, some curious, a few skeptical, but for once I wasn't nervous. "My husband started this foundation because he believed stories could save people," I said. "I used to think he meant fairy tales or novels. Turns out he meant the ones we live through." People smiled softly. Rebecca looked down, her lips trembling just a little. "This library isn't just a building," I continued. "It's proof that second chances don't come wrapped in ribbons. They come in mops, in forgiveness, and in doing the work no one else wants to do. It's where we remember who we were and who we still can be." When I finished, the room was quiet, not out of awkwardness, but out of understanding. Then the applause started, gentle at first, then louder. Walter whistled like a man proud of his own coaching. Afterward, Rebecca and I stood together in front of the new plaque. It read, "The Thomas Carter Reading Hall, for everyone who believes stories can rebuild what life breaks." She touched the edge of the plaque and whispered, "He would have loved this." "He already does," I said. We stayed there as people began to leave, the chatter fading until it was just the two of us. Outside, the sky was soft gold, the light spilling through the library windows like honey. Rebecca turned to me and said, "I didn't think I'd ever feel proud again, but I do. Not because of money or control, just because I finally understand what you were trying to protect." I smiled. "Welcome home, kiddo." Walter walked up, waving his camera like a weapon. "All right, ladies, smile for posterity. This is going on the front page of the Gazette whether you like it or not." Rebecca groaned. "Please tell me it's not another headline about revenge." Walter grinned. "Nope. I'm calling this one from Family Feud to Family Foundation. Catchy, I said. Yeah. He replied, because for once the ending actually feels earned. Rebecca laughed and leaned her head on my shoulder as the camera clicked. And for a brief moment, under the warm hum of that old library light, I felt the kind of peace that doesn't need to be announced. It just settles quietly, the way forgiveness always does when you finally stop resisting it. It was a few weeks after the dedication when I noticed Rebecca waiting for me outside the library. She wasn't wearing her janitor uniform this time, just jeans, a flannel shirt, and that nervous smile people wear when they're about to do something that matters. "Got a minute?" she asked. "Always," I said. She reached into her pocket and pulled out something small, wrapped in a handkerchief. "I found this in the storage closet," she said. "Mrs. Halloway said it used to open the front door before they changed the locks." When she unwrapped it, I saw it. A brass key, old-fashioned and heavy, the kind Thomas used to love collecting from antique shops. She held it out to me. "I figured you should have it. You built this place long before I ever understood it." I took the key and felt the weight of it in my palm. Cold, solid, familiar. "This isn't just metal," I said quietly. "It's proof you finally stopped trying to own things and started understanding them." She smiled a little. "Guess that makes me late to the lesson." "Late," I said, "is better than never showing up." We sat on the library steps for a while, watching kids run in and out of the building. Their laughter echoed through the brick hallways like music. I noticed how Rebecca kept looking at them, like she was trying to remember what it felt like to be that light-hearted. "You know," she said, "I used to think you gave the house away just to punish me." "Maybe I did," I said with a smirk. "For about 5 minutes." She laughed softly. "And after that, I realized I just wanted to give you a home that couldn't be measured in square feet." Rebecca nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "You and Dad always talked in riddles." "That's because we didn't have the patience to explain simple things to stubborn people." She nudged me with her elbow. "Guess I had that coming." "Guess you did," I said. For a while, we just sat there in easy silence. The kind of silence that isn't empty but full of everything that didn't need to be said anymore. The sun had started to set, painting the library windows in gold. I thought about how far we'd come, not as enemies or rivals, but as people who finally learned how to stop shouting long enough to listen. A familiar honk broke the quiet. Walter's Buick rolled to a stop by the curb, the same one that had picked me up the day Rebecca threw me out. He leaned out the window, grinning like a man who never learned tact. "You two hugging again? Lord help us, I can't handle this much emotion before lunch." Rebecca groaned. "Is he ever serious?" "Only during breakfast," I said. "After that, he's mostly cholesterol and opinions." Walter got out and waved the newspaper he'd been holding. "You see this? Gazette ran a follow-up piece. The Carter women from feud to foundation. I think I liked the drama title better." Rebecca smirked. "You just missed the chaos." "Chaos pays my electric bill," he said. "Peace doesn't sell papers." I stood and brushed off my coat. "That's fine. We're not selling anything anymore." Walter looked between us and grinned. "Well, look at you two. I go out of town for 3 days and suddenly it's all forgiveness and wisdom." Rebecca rolled her eyes, but she was smiling. "Don't get used to it. Don't get used to it." Walter leaned closer. "Don't worry, I'll give it a week before one of you starts lecturing the other about something philosophical." "Make it 2, I said. "We're pacing ourselves." The 3 of us stood there, watching as the last of the kids left the library, the door closing softly behind them. The air smelled like paper and rain, a mix of endings and beginnings. Rebecca turned to me. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Do you ever regret what you did?" I thought about that for a moment. The house, the trust, the fights, the sleepless nights, all of it. Then I shook my head. No, because regret belongs to people who didn't try. And I tried, messily, painfully, but I tried. She looked down at her hands. "I didn't make it easy." "No," I said gently. "But if it were easy, it wouldn't have been worth learning." She smiled again, softer this time. "You know, I think I finally understand why Dad loved this place so much." "Why's that?" I asked. "Because forgiveness lives here," she said, quietly, between the pages. That one caught me off guard. I blinked a few times, trying to keep my composure. He'd be proud of that answer. Walter wiped his glasses, pretending he wasn't tearing up. Well, if this turns into a Hallmark moment, I'm charging royalties. Rebecca laughed, and somehow that simple sound, the kind that used to fill our kitchen when she was a child, was enough to undo me. Not with sadness, but with relief, because it meant we'd found our way back. As the light faded, Walter started the car, muttering something about emotional women and low gas mileage. Rebecca and I walked toward the corner, the brass key still in my hand. "You keeping that?" she asked. "I am," I said. "It reminds me that every lock can open again if you find the right person to turn the key." She slipped her arm through mine as we crossed the street. "Then I guess it's my turn to keep it safe." I handed it to her. "Good, just don't lose it this time." She laughed, tucking it into her pocket. "I'll try not to." And as we reached the other side of the street, the library behind us glowed like a lantern in the dusk, steady, warm, unassuming. It didn't belong to either of us anymore, and somehow that made it feel more like home than it ever had before. Winter came quietly that year. The first snow in Maple Hollow didn't rush in like a storm. It drifted down slow, as if it knew we'd all had enough chaos for a while. The library looked different under the snow, glowing soft yellow against the white, the windows fogged from the warmth inside. Rebecca had been working there full-time for a few weeks now. She wasn't just sweeping floors anymore, she was helping with inventory, learning how to handle the front desk, even teaching a group of kids how to check out books. I'd stop by sometimes, pretending to be there for a donation receipt, when really I just wanted to watch her in her new rhythm. Walter teased me about it. "You keep looking at her like she's a zoo exhibit," he said. "She's working," I said. "That's rare enough to document." He laughed, loud enough for the librarian to glare at us. "You're both getting soft," he whispered. "Next thing I know, you'll be baking cookies for the reading club." But the truth was, the town had changed too. The same people who once gossiped about the Carter feud now showed up with homemade pies for the library's community events. The mayor, who'd once scolded me for destabilising local business, cut the ribbon for a new reading hall expansion and called it a victory for small-town spirit. Even he couldn't resist a redemption story. One morning, I found Rebecca standing by the bulletin board, hanging up a child's crayon drawing. It was crooked and misspelled, but it said, "Thank you, Miss Rebecca, for making the library clean and pretty." She stared at it longer than necessary, her thumb brushing the edge of the paper. "Looks like you've got fans," I said. She smiled without turning around. "Feels weird being useful again." "You were always useful," I said. "You just forgot what for." She looked at me then. Really looked. "You know, Mom, I think that's the nicest insult you've ever given me." "Then I'm improving," I said. We spent that afternoon shelving donated books, our conversation quiet and easy. It wasn't the kind of bond you see in movies, no tearful hugs or grand speeches, just two people who'd finally learned how to share the same space without breaking it. Later, when the sun dipped low and the snow outside turned gold, Walter came in wearing his usual chaos-coloured scarf. "All right, team literacy," he said. "Guess who just got a call from the Gazette?" Rebecca groaned. "Please tell me they're not writing another story." "Oh, they are," he said. "But this one's about the Foundation's scholarship fund. Apparently your little reading program got donations from 3 neighbouring towns." Her eyes widened. "You're kidding." "Nope," Walter said. "Turns out people love second chances almost as much as gossip." I felt a swell of pride that surprised me, not because of the money, but because the story had changed. We weren't the cautionary tale anymore, we were the example. As we locked up for the night, the snow was falling harder, covering the street in a thin white blanket. Rebecca held the door for me and said, "You know, I never thought I'd say this, but I like it here. The quiet, the books, the people." "Even Walter?" I asked. "Especially Walter," she said. "He's like a sitcom character who refuses to leave after the pilot." Walter, hearing his name, waved dramatically. "That's because I'm what this town needs, comic relief and tax advice." Rebecca laughed, the sound bouncing off the brick walls, warm and alive. I couldn't help but join in. We walked outside, snow crunching under our shoes. The sky had that deep blue stillness that only happens in winter, when every sound feels softer. Rebecca slipped her arm through mine. "Mom," she said quietly, "I know you think I learned a lesson here, and I did, but it wasn't just about money or pride." I looked at her curious. Then what was it about? She hesitated, then said, about seeing you as a person again, not just the woman who raised me or the one who stood in my way, but the person who's still standing. That one hit deeper than I expected. I didn't have words for it, so I just squeezed her hand. Walter cleared his throat dramatically. I'd cry too, but my tear ducts froze in 87. Rebecca rolled her eyes. You ruin every moment. Only the ones that get too sentimental, he said. We reached the corner where the streetlight flickered against the falling snow. The library glowed behind us, steady and warm. I stopped and looked back at it one more time. You think Dad would be proud of all this? Rebecca smiled. He'd say we finally finished what he started. Walter snorted. And then he'd take credit for the idea. Probably, I said, laughing. The three of us stood there for a moment, an old man, a mother, and a daughter, watching the town that had watched us fall apart and come back together. The snow kept falling, slow and sure, blanketing everything in forgiveness. Rebecca turned toward home, the brass key glinting in her pocket as she walked ahead of us. I followed behind, listening to her footsteps crunch rhythmically in the snow. It was a sound I hadn't heard in years, the sound of peace keeping pace with love, neither one rushing, both finally going in the same direction. By January, Maple Hollow had settled into that soft kind of winter where everything feels muted. The snow piled high on rooftops, the air smelled of wood smoke, and the library glowed each evening like a lantern in the cold. Most nights, I'd walk by after dinner just to watch it from across the street. Inside, I could see Rebecca shelving books or helping kids with homework, her breath fogging up the windows when she laughed. There was something almost sacred about it. One night, I was standing there with my cane, staring at the windows when Rebecca spotted me through the glass. She waved, then disappeared for a moment and came back outside holding 2 cups of cocoa. Mom, she said, handing one to me, it's freezing. You shouldn't be standing out here like some ghost in a storm. I smiled. I like the view, she smirked. You could just come inside. I already have, I said, just in a different way. She rolled her eyes. You're doing that poetic thing again. Comes with age, I said, sipping the cocoa. It was terrible, too sweet, just like her father used to make. You remembered. Of course I did, she said. He always said good cocoa should hurt your teeth. We both laughed, and for a moment the cold didn't matter. The street around us was silent, except for the soft crunch of snow under passing boots and the faint hum of the town's Christmas lights still blinking, even though it was long past December. Rebecca looked down at her cup. You know, Mom, I used to think you got even with me, but now I see you just gave me another chance. I looked at her, proud and a little heartbroken. Your father always said revenge is just another word for correction. Maybe he was right, she nodded. He usually was. We stood there in the kind of quiet that doesn't need fixing. After a while, she said, I've been thinking about expanding the children's section, adding a corner for art and storytelling. The board's on board, if you can believe that. That's a good idea, I said. Thomas would have loved it. I know, she said softly. I guess I just want to keep what he started going. I smiled. That's all any of us can do. Keep things going until someone else takes the next turn. Walter's Buick pulled up just then, horn blaring twice like always. He rolled down the window and shouted, Are we having a deep moment again? Because if so, I need popcorn. Rebecca groaned. He really has no volume control. Blessing and curse, I said. He's loud enough to scare away bad days. Walter stepped out, bundled in a scarf that looked like it had lost a fight with a Christmas tree. Evening, ladies, I brought leftovers. Don't ask from where. I stopped labelling them months ago. Rebecca took the container, sniffed it, and said, If I die eating this, I'm haunting you. He grinned. That's fine. You'd be good company. We all laughed and walked back inside. The warmth of the library hit us immediately. Books, heat, the faint scent of pine cleaner. It was the kind of warmth that didn't just come from the thermostat, but from people finally figuring out how to exist in the same space without trying to win. Mrs. Halloway waved from behind the counter. If you're bringing food in here again, at least share it with the board members, she said. Walter winked. Sorry, ma'am. Confidential evidence. Rebecca shook her head and started arranging chairs for the evening reading group. I helped her, though. Help. Might be generous considering I mostly handed her the lighter ones. When everyone settled in, she began reading aloud to a small group of kids huddled around her. Her voice carried softly through the room, calm, steady, kind. It was strange hearing that same voice that once shouted at me over property deeds, now bringing stories to life for a room full of children. It made me think that maybe some parts of us never change. They just learn better ways to speak. Walter nudged me and whispered, "You know, she's pretty good at that." "She's always been good," I said. "She just forgot." He smiled. Guess she found the right story to remind her. Outside, snow continued falling against the windows, soft and endless. Inside, Rebecca's voice rose and fell like music. The kids leaned in, eyes wide, the way kids do when they realize stories aren't just things on paper, they're bridges to somewhere safe. When she finished, one little boy handed her a folded piece of paper. "For you, Miss Rebecca," he said shyly. She opened it and read the crayon message. "Thank you for fixing the library." Her voice caught for a second. She smiled at the boy, then glanced at me. I smiled back, and in that silent exchange, everything that needed to be forgiven was. Later that night, as we were leaving, she locked the front door and slipped the brass key into her pocket. The snow had thickened, turning the whole street into a quiet world of white. She looked up at the library sign, Ruth Pierce Literacy Fund, her mother's name still carved in gold. "Do you ever miss the old house?" she asked. I thought about it. "Sometimes, but not the way you think. I miss what it used to mean. Now that meaning lives here instead." She nodded slowly. "Yeah," she said, "I get that." We stood there for another moment, watching the light spill through the library windows. Then she turned and handed me one of the leftover cookies from Walter's mystery box. "Truce cookie?" she said. "Only if it's not poisoned," I replied. She laughed. "No promises." We ate them right there under the falling snow, our breath mingling in the cold. Across the street, Walter's car idled, headlights cutting through the haze, the man himself probably humming something off-key. Rebecca looked at me, eyes softer than they'd been in years. "You know, Mom, I think I finally understand what home means." I nodded. "So do I." She slipped her arm through mine as we started walking toward the car. The snow crunched beneath us, and the library light behind us glowed warmer than any house ever could. We didn't say another word. We didn't need to. Sometimes the best endings aren't endings at all. They're just the moment you realize you've started living the story the right way. That night, as we drove away, the snow kept falling like the world was finally quiet enough to rest. The town lights blurred in the distance, and I thought about how strange it was, the way revenge had turned into something softer, something almost like grace. People love to talk about revenge stories as if they're about payback. But this wasn't about winning. It was about finding peace after being broken by the people you love most. In the end, that's what family revenge stories really are, not tales of fury, but of forgiveness earned the hard way, of learning that sometimes justice looks less like punishment and more like letting go. Rebecca and I didn't fix everything. We just stopped trying to hurt each other long enough to heal. And somehow, that was enough. If you've ever watched a family fall apart and find its way back together, you already know this. Real redemption doesn't come from revenge. It comes from love that refuses to die. And if you believe every family drama deserves its own second chance, subscribe to the channel for more family revenge stories like this one, where every ending reminds us that even revenge can lead home.